So water quality is very closely related to human health. There are beneficial effects, and some of them are related to health benefits from the environment. And it's also related to the quality of the food we can get from water. And it is high quality food. I'll tell you what I mean by that. But there are also negative effects. You will hear more. I think we are not talking too much about pollution in this training course, but you will certainly hear more about harmful algal blooms. And I will try to talk to you a little bit more about infectious diseases. So let's begin with the health benefits. I came across this article, a web article by a journalist who talked about these 10 surprising health benefits from going to the beach. So there is a list. So apparently these are scientifically or medically demonstrated benefits. Some of them you might argue are just benefits from actually being active and going out. But some are supposed to be really specifically tied to the ocean. The smell of the ocean is supposed to be good for you. And they also say that walking barefoot in the sand is a great workout and it's good for arthritis. So these are all the things that the medical community is now taking seriously. It's supposed to reduce depression. It's good. And some are related to anti-inflammatory properties of seawater, just walking along the water, not just on the sand and so on. So we would advise people to go to the beach for your health. But if you do that, then you need to choose clean beaches, and then water quality becomes a criterion. So over this lecture series, you have been hearing about water quality from space. And there are some references here of the different types of water quality that you can get from satellites. And one of the advantages of a satellite observation of water quality is that depending on the problem, whether it is a beach problem or a global problem, you can look at it at different scales. Global scale, as in this one, or regional scale, or a very local scale. This is one of our study areas, and it is from actually it's called a lake, but it is a lake estuarine river system. And it is down south of where we are now on the Arabian coast. This system opens out into the Arabian Sea. So you can look at very local systems at a very local scale as well. But there are always advantages to doing things at a local scale if you want to address local issues. But if you are doing that, I hope you have gotten the takeaway message from previous lectures that it's always good to have local in situ observations. And the closer you get to the coast and to inland water bodies, the more complex the systems are optically. So if you have local observations, you can use those observations to validate your algorithms and, if necessary, improve them for the local conditions. But once you have done those, you can create these maps of quality products, whether it is chlorophyll, suspended sediment, and so on. There are also health benefits of food from the sea, and oceans and inland waters are a source of high protein food and high quality food. And they talk about harvesting down the trophic chain. Now people are talking about harvesting phytoplankton for your health. I came across this also on the internet. You can buy 100 grams of phytoplankton powder for a princely sum of 106 pounds. I'm not advocating it, but I found it interesting that the health benefits of phytoplankton are being recognized, and now people are marketing that. But it worried me that the powder has this bright green color. Never mind. So it is being increasingly recognized as a vegan ATP energy superfood. So more down to earth, there is evidence that phytoplankton and high phytoplankton concentrations and high productive areas are also areas of high fisheries production. This example is from the US. So fish, as you know, and different types, certain types of fish are considered high quality. And high quality in this case means that they have a high, so they are a high source. They are a source of high content of essential fatty acids, including omega-3 and other essential acids. And diatoms are supposed to contain high quantities of some of these essential fatty acids. So to the extent that we can map diatoms from space, and if you know the per unit content of fatty acid per diatom chlorophyll, then in principle, you have a mechanism for mapping these fatty acids from space. This was an interesting study we did, 10 years ago now, where we looked at this in a small area of the Northwest Atlantic. And then we said, okay, if we extrapolate it globally, do we have enough fatty acid to feed the growing requirements for fatty oils from the sea? There is a cod liver oil and shark liver oil and things like that are sold as a source of essential fatty acids. But these fishes don't produce these fatty acids. The only way they get them is from consuming phytoplankton. So phytoplankton are the ultimate source of these. And some of them, there are no equivalent sources on land. So we are dependent on phytoplankton for some of these essential health products. We heard Anik's talk the other day where he talked about how India is using satellite-based maps to identify potential fishing areas. And the idea is that it can be used to reduce the effort and improve efficiency and return for the fishermen, and then contribute to sustainable management. For example, they don't give these advisories during the spawning period to protect the fish. And you can use it to give support to aquaculture industry. And again, I think we heard about some of them. It can be used to determine the carrying capacity and hypoxic events. This is an example from Benguela region of South, where there was what they called a lobster walkout. The hypoxic event was so intense that all the lobsters walked out of the water, came to the beach, and died. So these are dramatic events that we need to worry about. But I'll tell you even more about that. But if you think about these in a most general way, if you look at world history, cities have always sprung up around water. They need water for the cities. This is an example from near Delhi. The Mughal Emperor Akbar decided that he would move his capital from Delhi to a brand new city called Fatehpur Sikri. And this is how he built the city. And water was part of the planning, the city planning. And they had these big lakes for your health benefit because it's considered good for you and so on. But what they didn't anticipate was that the groundwater supply would run out when a huge population from Delhi moved to this rather dry area. So in 10 years, they had to abandon the city. And now it is just this abandoned city that you can go and see as a tourist. But the concept that health is linked to water and air quality is also not new. The golden age of Islam is supposed to have occurred in the 10th century AD, more or less. And at that time, in the Islamic countries, I'm talking particularly about Baghdad, so Iran, I think, isn't it? Yeah. They used to build hospitals that were called Bimaristans, which is the same word that they use in India. Bimar is to be sick. They used to build the hospitals on the side of the rivers and on sloping land, and they would divert the river to flow through the hospital and out. It was not that they actually wanted to use the river water, but their idea was that flowing water helped the patients. So in their concept, flowing water was considered good, and it was incorporated into their architecture, whether it was home. And there is this example of actually Muslim architecture in Granada in Spain, where the hammam or the bathing places were an important part of the lifestyle and the health considerations. And it's said that, actually it is recorded, it's known, that when a famous physician, Abu Bakr al-Razi, was asked to build hospitals in Baghdad, he carried out an experiment in which he placed raw meat in different locations of the city, and then he watched the rate of putrefaction of the meat. And the point was that if it decayed fast, the air quality was not good. And so he established the hospitals in locations where the air quality was good. And this is sometimes cited as one of the early examples of evidence-based approach to science. If you come to Indian traditional medicine, I haven't come across any statement that says flowing water was good, but they do say that boiled water is good, and that still remains a fact today. So, in short, life depends on water. We need water for many things. No water, no life. And these are pictures again from my home area in the state of Kerala, where the life revolves around water. And these waters are related to the Vembanad Lake I told you about. So they use the water for recreation, for fishing, for everything, cultivation. But water can also take away life. For example, when you have these unusual flooding, only last week, Valencia was very heavily flooded and with a heavy loss. So the water has two phases, the benign one and the devastating one. So when these things happen, we can turn to satellites for mapping the flooded areas. At the time of the Kerala floods, they did use Sentinel-1 data to map the flooded areas. And we also made our own little contribution by seeing to what extent we can use Sentinel-2 data to fill gaps in the maps in between the passes of the Sentinel-1 radars. So flood mapping is one area where remote sensing can help. But interestingly, I also learned that the farmers in that area said that there was huge devastation in 2018, but 2019 saw a bumper crop. So there is some benefits to it. But that is one episode. But this area around the lake that I'm talking about is an area where they cultivate paddy below sea level. So they are not unused to flooding. But now they say that the flooding events have increased in frequency And once the flooding occurs, the waters don't recede as fast. So we are reporting climate refugees now from this area. I go to meetings where people sit and talk about climate refugees as something that's going to happen, but it is happening already. So these are important problems associated with water. According to this newspaper article, some 15% of the people have left. And that is eating into the resilience of the communities to perturbations, because the perturbations are increasing in intensity and in duration. But that was a local event. If you look at what's happening globally, there was this review paper that came out in 2020, where they show very clearly that water-related disasters are a worldwide problem. And the number of people affected run into globally into hundreds of millions of people on an annual basis. And so these events, according to the review, are also associated with health issues. In the instance of floods, waterborne diseases follow flooding, and that accounts for some 40% of the impact on people's health. Mental health problems and vector-borne diseases all follow the flooding events. There are also impacts from drought, and there the mental health problems seem to dominate, and waterborne diseases are much smaller. But this is, in the end, it is not a huge study, which also brings me to the point that these problems are not investigated enough. It's an understudied problem. But World Health Organization does recognize the importance of these issues. So according to the World Health Organization, in 2020, 240 million cases of malaria occurred, of which 627,000 were fatal. And each year, again, reporting is very bad, so you have a wide range, somewhere between 1.3 to 4 million cases of cholera occur every year. And out of that, somewhere between 21,000 to 143,000 deaths occur worldwide. And when it comes, many of these diseases occur from lack of proper drinking water. So drinking water or lack of it is a growing problem. They say 785 million people lack even the basic service, and 144 million are dependent on surface water as opposed to pipe water, I suppose, or even bore well or anything. And this is stunning. At least 2 billion people globally use drinking water contaminated with fecal material. And contaminated drinking water causes 485,000 diarrheal diseases and deaths each year. And by 2025, they figure that is in a couple of months. They figure that half of the world's population will be living in water-stressed areas. And even in localities where drinking water provision is taken care of, when you have natural disasters, these supplies break down. And that's one reason why these natural disasters are often followed by health problems. So World Health, now we are oceanographers and aquatic scientists, so you may wonder why I'm talking to you about health. The reason is that even the medical community, the WHO, they recognize that many of the determinants and the controls of these types of diseases are outside the control of the health sector. So who are the other sectors that should be involved? That includes environmental and climate change, education, agriculture, trade, tourism, transport, industrial development, and housing. So it is from the environmental and climate change side that we come into this problem. So I will largely talk about what space technology can contribute, but it is only a part of the problem, and sometimes it's a small part of the problem. So you have to think about it as an integrated, uh, as an instance where an integrated approach is needed, and the science developments in many areas have to match what satellites can do to bring the maximum benefit to addressing these issues. That's what I said. Integration is crucial. So there are different kinds of waterborne and vector-borne diseases, and some of them are referred to as zoonotic diseases, where the transmission is from animal to the humans. And some of these types of diseases are on the increase. If you remember, COVID was considered, at least by some people, to have started in some bats or some other animals. So these kinds of things are supposed to increase in time. So the germs can spread from animals to humans through direct contact, indirect contact, vector-borne, through vectors, or it may be through water or through food. And water-associated diseases are also a diverse group. They can include diarrheal diseases such as cholera, skin diseases associated with bacteria or parasites, and many vector-borne diseases require water, sometimes stagnant water, to complete the life cycle of the vectors, notably mosquitoes. And hepatitis is also in this family. So if you think about Vibrio cholerae, which is a bacterium responsible for cholera, they survive in water in between infections. If you think about many diseases that are transmitted through mosquitoes, the egg and larval stages of the mosquitoes need water to complete them. And when you have environmental degradation, it could be, as in this instance, invasive species of water hyacinth, which is very beautiful to look at. They can create stagnant pools of water and possibly harbor more vectors and bacteria than they might do otherwise. And we started looking at Vibrio bacteria before we looked at other diseases through water. It has a very complicated life cycle. There are known to be some 200 serotypes of Vibrio cholerae bacteria, and only 2 of them, O1 and O139, are associated with major cholera outbreaks. So that's cholera bacteria. Then there's Vibrio alginolyticus, causes wound and ear infections if you are exposed to water. And parahemolyticus is associated with food poisoning, and the symptoms can include cramps, diarrhea, headache, fever. And the nastiest one of them is the last one, vulnificus, which infests you through wound. If you have an open wound and if you are susceptible and you come in contact with the infected waters, and very often it leads to septicemia and then to death. So if you look at the Vibrio genome, you see that they are able to do recombination and horizontal gene transfer, and they contribute to the evolution of the Vibrio species. So these areas that we have been looking at, they are also, if you sample the waters, they also show high antimicrobial resistance. So if even the environment becomes resistant, then the antibiotics that you use for treatment of these diseases also become ineffective. And you can get these diseases through direct contact, or it can be person-to-person contact. But I don't want to give you the impression that this is only water quality is only a problem for the tropical developing countries. It is even a huge problem, I think, in just about all the countries I've heard about, including the States. It is certainly a problem in the UK, where oh, ignore that thing about another talk in 2 weeks. That's a mistake. Now, in the UK, there are citizen activists who are fighting for water quality. And many of them are surfers, and they want to have clean water to surf in. And they are turning out to be a force for change. I think, what are they called? Surfers against sewage. That's what they call themselves. And they put out all the information about when these the bodies responsible for water management and water supply are breaking the rules. Actually, the UK rule is that if their facilities are overloaded because of heavy rains or something, they can release legally untreated water into the system. So hopefully the new government will do something about it. One lives in hope. So if you think about the role of the environment in disease infections and so on, there are this kind of a different multiple pathways through which the environment affects the route to disease. So if you look at start with an infection, the infection can start because of poor sanitation conditions, or it can come from consumption of contaminated fish or seafood, which in turn depends on the aquatic reservoirs of pathogens, and that again depends on sanitation conditions. And if you are using this contaminated water for drinking, cooking, bathing, fishing, and so on, you are just multiplying the sources of infection. So if the sanitation conditions are poor, you can get secondary infection. It can also reintroduce the pathogens into the environment, and their growth and decay will depend on the local conditions and also on the physical processes, circulation, flushing, and so on. And if you look at how environmental conditions affect growth and decay, temperature and salinity emerge as key factors. These are early studies, so these are not that we didn't know about it before, but salinity can affect the growth of and temperature of can affect the growth of the pathogenic group of bacteria that belong to the genus Vibrio. So increasingly, satellite data are being used to explain variations in the number of Vibrio cells, shall we say, or some measure of their abundance that are present in water. This, I think, might be an example from Chesapeake Bay. So temperature explained 48% of the variation in the abundance of Vibrio. Two types of Vibrio. And the Vibrio samples were only isolated when the water temperature was between a range 15 and 27. And that means that as water temperatures are increasing, some of these pathogenic bacteria are moving into higher latitudes where the temperatures were unfavorable for them in earlier days. If you look to an example from this work from Italian scientists, they were able to show that the abundance of three different types of Vibrio in the northern North Sea, Iceland, anyway, parts of the North Atlantic, they showed a high dependence on the temperature anomalies. And also the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation that was responsible for the change in the temperature. This study by Baker Austin and colleagues that was devoted to the Baltic Sea. And the point that they make is that some of these infections that were unknown in Northern Europe are now appearing more and more frequently. And the number of cases reported from these areas were related to the ocean heat waves. And of course, in that area, the European summer temperature, the heat waves are increasing, and the magnitude of these heat waves are also increasing. We are talking about water temperatures, and water temperatures in the Baltic, it was related to the outbreaks of the cases in Sweden. In our own example, there are studies that showed that temperature and salinity determine the distribution of Vibrio cholerae bacteria in the water. So according to some studies, the ideal salinity is about 10, I think, and temperature less than 30 and greater than 10 seem to favor the occurrence of Vibrio bacteria in the water. And in the lake that we study, the temperatures are now rising quite frequently to temperatures above this ideal, the cutoff threshold of 30 degrees. So I thought maybe they won't like too high temperatures, but I was told by experts, no. Remember that they survive very well inside the human body, so they're okay with 36, 38. Then the other point of looking at the aquatic reservoirs is through looking at the how and where the pathogens reside in the water. And the pathogens, and they use different components of the aquatic system for their survival. So if you look at the Vibrio cholerae in the natural environment, they are a part of the natural ecosystem. So it is not that we can consider getting rid of them totally. It's not going to be possible. What we can do is try to minimize or eliminate our own adding more of these bacteria to the ecosystems, and also make sure that the particularly virulent forms of the bacteria don't reach the environment through the human route. So the persistence of Vibrio cholerae in the water can be as free-floating planktonic Vibrios. They can aggregate with phytoplankton, zooplankton, or insect egg masses and exoskeletons of zooplankton and so on. So if you then consume the infected water, you can start an outbreak. And the human host, it colonizes the human gut, and then eventually it is secreted out. But it can survive for months in the water before the next infection happens. In Bangladesh, for example, the outbreaks of cholera are seasonal. So in between two seasons, they are doing very well in the water. So in this particular example of satellite-based chlorophyll estimation and sea surface temperature and rainfall data, all used for the big city of Kolkata in India, and they say that you can see from the example below, the number of cases could be statistically linked to ocean color of phytoplankton, temperature, and rainfall. And they are also able to do this in a way that helps predict when the next outbreak might happen. We tried this for our area too, and the same thing, we found that chlorophyll concentration you can get from satellites, but in this part of the world, when the monsoons set in, you have persistent cloud cover. So it's very difficult to get satellite data. So you need in situ observations to complement the satellite data and also to get the observations at depth. And it, okay, so why and how do we find this correlation or relationship between phytoplankton and Vibrio cholerae? One hypothesis is that there is no direct link. On the other hand, the phytoplankton, no, they like zooplankton because zooplankton carapace contain chitin, and they like to use chitin as a source of food. And so the link is indirect. If you have a phytoplankton bloom, the zooplankton follow the phytoplankton, and then you're using ocean color to track the phytoplankton. And there is a lot of evidence that shows these bacteria attaching directly to the zooplankton. But there are other studies that show strong Vibrio phytoplankton association. This study of the southwest coast of India, it's a model coefficient of relationship with the total Vibrio in the water. And you can see that the diatom biovolume appears to be the most correlated. I think these are all supposed to be significant relationships. And chlorophyll A is also there, and then total bacteria in relation to Vibrio bacteria. So they suggested that resource supply from primary producers are more important for this association. And in our study in the Vembanad Lake, we looked at Vibrio cholerae in association with zooplankton, phytoplankton, sediment, macrobenthos, and in the water sample itself. And according to those results, phytoplankton appeared to be the most frequently used reservoir of phytoplankton. So this leads to other hypotheses that maybe there is a direct link between phytoplankton and Vibrio cholerae. So one of the hypotheses is that the link is formed through biofilms that the Vibrio cholerae form around phytoplankton. So this gives them security in numbers, and it can also be a source of food. And there are reports that show that these biofilms contain Vibrio and phytoplankton in association. But there is another, well, not another, but it is a related field of research called chemical ecology. And they say that phytoplankton and the Vibrio, they can produce chemicals to signal to each other. And they use these chemical signaling to create micro environments that they like. So there is supposed to be a phycosphere that's around phytoplankton, and phytoplankton can control what lives in this phycosphere through the chemical compounds that they release. They can choose beneficial organisms or get rid of things that they don't want. And again, in our area, this is our preliminary result. We published it, but we have more data now, and we think we need to revise it. So according to this, we do find environmental Vibrio cholerae in relation to cholera being related. But in certain parts, there's also a negative correlation, and we are exploring those, why these things happen. But what is, for me, striking was that the probability of finding these bacteria in the water seems to never fall below about 50%. So the danger of finding these bacteria or encountering the environmental versions of these bacteria are high regardless. And phytoplankton may act as a modifier. So there are, as I said in the previous result, we see that it's a positive association sometimes and a negative association some other times. And if you search in the literature, you also find that some types of phytoplankton are associated with certain types of phytoplankton, and they confirm that the mucilaginous sheets of phytoplankton provide uh, an environment for supporting these bacteria. But there are also some results that show very clearly that certain other types of phytoplankton can have an inhibitory effect on the bacteria. So it's not enough for us to just know that there are phytoplankton present. It looks like at the next level, we need to know what is the type of phytoplankton present. The other area that we are exploring at the moment is looking at the floating algae. As I mentioned, the Vembanad Lake has an invasive species of macroalgae that are floating vegetation, which you can monitor from space. And at the same time, this is our OCM. No, this is actually planet data. And then we also use Sentinel-2 data to implement an algorithm. And we are looking at whether these macroalgae serve as micro reservoirs for mosquitoes. Then this is all about the circulation and sanitation and so on. And for that, I turned to not Vibrio, but another indicator of fecal contamination, which is the E. coli. E. coli contamination in the lake can also be very high. The human population around the lake is, the density is very high. And these, what we found in the results was that when the monsoons come in, the bacterial counts go up and then they fall back. So our first thought was that this is related to flooding, because the area when we carried out the experiments were also the year of the floods. But in fact, when we looked at the data more closely, it showed that the peak in the average E. coli in the water peaked in July before the monsoons. So this has moved us to another hypothesis that what's happening is something like this, probably. In the normal conditions, the ground level and the lake water level lie below the septic treatment plants and so on. But when the initial when the initial rains come in, monsoon rains, so very heavy, the groundwater level and the lake waters rise. And before any flooding happens, you have the potential for these waters to now start mixing with the septic treatment plants. And then the contamination through the groundwater enters the lake system. So for this part of our study area, to solve this problem will be very difficult because this is a low-lying area, and the chances of flooding and of groundwater levels rising are very high. But so even having a proper sanitation facility is not the end of the solution. So we thought that we could come up with a mathematical model to describe the cholera bacterial contamination as a function of environmental conditions, but it turned out to be very difficult. What did turn out to be a little more easy was to look at the COVID. COVID turns out to be much more tractable from a modeling point of view because the transmission path is very direct and very quick. So you can look at it as the so-called susceptible, exposed, infected, and recovered kind of model, where you can model the population, the number of cases as a function of the protocols that were followed in Kerala for preventing COVID disease outbreaks, and how many numbers ended up in hospitals and so on. So if I go back to this diagram that I showed earlier, it looks like environment and satellites can provide some contribution to each of these pathways of increasing infections through environmental contamination. But before I end, I want to emphasize the importance of data quality. We can only do these studies to the extent that we have data on diseases. And that turns out to be very difficult. Now, as a satellite oceanographic community, we are used to a lot of data being freely available instantaneously. But governments and health organizations are very reluctant to release health data, and most importantly, disease data, because that can be seen as a failure of the government. According to this, I think it is a WHO investigation, they say that more than 4.7 million people are thought to have died in India from COVID-19. And that is 10 times greater than the reported number of cases. And it's not just India, the underreporting was a problem throughout. And COVID was one of the best reported cases. And so if we are getting 10% of the data, then that means we are pretty much working with the noise. So it's a big problem. These days, we are trying to work through contacts in WHO to see if they have a voice in improving reporting. But there are a couple more other examples that link the big picture with climate and climate variability. This study by Martinez Hurtaza and colleagues, they suggest that the El Nino that creates warm temperatures in the Pacific Ocean can act as a long-distance corridor for transmitting the disease, transporting the disease bacteria right across the Pacific and then across down South America. And they show that the incidences of the diseases correspond with incidence of with changes in the water temperature from 1990 to 2014. And in a similar study, there was Escobar and colleagues who looked at marine environments that are suitable for cholera bacteria. Okay, these are model studies, so take it with a pinch of salt, but it's worth thinking about these things. So this is what they were able to find as through some clever statistical tools, I think some kind of principal component analysis, and it's an ecological niche model to see what kind of temperature, power, salinity, and chlorophyll favor the bacteria. So this is today's map, or 2015's map. And they say that if you do climate projections, then depending on the future climate condition, the waters favorable for these bacteria could spread, well, in one version all over the globe, and in some version certainly into higher latitudes. And these things are also being picked up at very high levels, for example, by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which have zero hunger, good health, clean water, climate action, and life below water as their strategic development goals. And I just wanted to highlight that remote sensing can support these goals through looking at food quality, waterborne diseases, water quality, and so on. And I want to highlight that ocean color is just as useful in lakes as in the ocean. And when you look at these SDG goals, by 2030, protect and restore water-related ecosystems, including wetlands, rivers, aquifers, and lakes. We have our job cut out for us. This is in 6 years' time. So I just want to conclude by saying that there is a role for us and for remote sensing to contribute to addressing these real problems. But it is complex, and I don't think we should pretend that remote sensing by itself can solve this problem. We can contribute something, and I think we need to join hands with other sectors to be able to find the solutions. So we are also working with the people in Kerala through citizen science to engage them also in the activities. And we think that it's only when they understand and they decide to do it that something will happen. No amount of scientific publications will have any impact. So it goes beyond scientific publications, really. And that is my last slide, I think. Oh, no, this is my last slide. I came across this quote. It's in German. I can't read, but there is a translation. This is somebody, scientist Thienemann in 1925. He said, if you know the color of a lake, you also know its other characteristics. So I think we are following in his footsteps. Maybe we can't know everything, but we do know a lot through ocean color. And thank you.